Welcome everyone to Universal Dialogues 2, All We Don't Know, hosted by the Astrobiology Society at the University of Manchester.
Today is a very special day for us at the Astrobiology Society. 1 year ago, we were presenting here on our very own YouTube channel one of the biggest astrobiology discussions panels ever held online by students. And today, we are doing the same thing again here with Universal Dialogues 2. My name is Joaquin, and I am the president of the Astrobiology Society. And today, I am here with Salma and Marco. Salma, our outreach coordinator, and Marco, our finance director and innovation officer, who will co-host this event tonight with me. Obviously, this panel has also been possible thanks to the other members of our committee, Silvia, our secretary, Salome, our marketing director, and Luna, our events manager. So they will be behind the scenes tonight, just interacting with you on YouTube. So feel free to ask any questions on the chat. And yeah, about Universal Dialogues, I think it is just an ode to science, to reflection, and perhaps exploration. In this event, we aim to dissect what life is, what it is, and perhaps even what being alive means. And this is definitely not an easy task, and it has been approached by not only scientists, but also the thinkers and possibly humanity in general. And tonight, we have invited 4 of the most relevant and critical scientists in Seti, Meti, and astrobiology that Salma is going to introduce for you.
Absolutely. So it is with great honor that I introduce to you today's legendary and remarkable panelists. So firstly, we have theoretical and astrophysicist, best-selling author, professor of science at Harvard University, and head of the Galileo Project, Avi Loeb, and the paperback edition of his newest book, Extraterrestrial, The First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth, is out now, so you can check that out. We have astronomer, Jesuit priest, and former director of the Vatican Observatory, Dr. José Gabriel-Funes. And for Spanish speakers, you can check out the website Project Other, where you can learn more about his research. We have physicist, astrobiologist, best-selling author of over 30 books, Regents Professor and Director of the Beyond Center at Arizona State University, Paul Davies. And he just published another revolutionary book titled What's Eating the Universe and Other Cosmic Questions, which you can check out as well. And finally, we have physicist, former chief scientist of NASA, and former director of the Planetary Science Division at NASA, Dr. Jim Green, who has also recently released a book titled 50 Years Solar System Exploration, Historic Perspectives, which you can check out as well. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So yeah, well, I guess that in order to introduce this, just science, as you know, is essentially wondering. And precisely, scientists usually wonder about all those things that they don't have an answer for. And I think that's what we are going to try to do here today. Talk science and discuss those things that we don't know. What we have called the 4 unknowns. So whether there is life elsewhere in the universe, if we have ever been visited, the implications this could have, and if we should visit them. So these questions have always captivated us humans, and probably if you're watching this today, that means that you're not an exception. We don't have an answer for them, but we can hypothesize about it. But anyway, I guess that what we know as for now is just that we don't know. And this is precisely what Paul answered to this question when we asked him if we are alone in the universe. So Paul, what is it that you think that it will be required for this answer to be yes or no? What are we missing there?
Well, it's always hard to prove a negative. And so even if we search for 1,000 years and don't find any life beyond Earth, we can't say that there is none. But of course, all it would require is one microbe. And that microbe could even be right here on Earth. It doesn't have to be beyond Earth. If we knew that life had happened twice, that there had been a second genesis, we'd know the transition from non-life to life would be a relatively easy one, and we could be pretty sure the universe is teeming with it. I might say that when I was your age, I was totally convinced that not only was there life, but there was intelligent life out there, because I sort of felt in my soul it ought to be there. And I couldn't find anybody else. One might have professed an interest in looking for fairies. It seemed to the scientific community that, yes, of course we're alone. Life is so remarkable. It's got to be a bizarre fluke. And now the pendulum has swung the other way, and it's fashionable to say that the universe is teeming with life. But we still don't know what, in my view, is the biggest unknown in this, which is given another planet with Earth-like conditions, what are the chances of life, of non-life turning into life? We don't know the answer to that, so it's a completely open question.
What happened to the live stream?
I have no idea. That was a Marco. They can hear me now. Okay. I mean, does it look nice? Are they just hearing me? Can you try to join through your phone while Tim joins? And let's try to see. Sorry for that. And I think we're live. So let's try to wait until hopefully the other two join. I don't know what happened in there. Well, I think it was messy 2 minutes. And I'm sorry, Paul, they were speaking.
Well, I pretty much come to the end of what I was going to say. I just wanted to finish by saying, of course, there's a huge difference between finding a microbe, an alien microbe on Earth or beyond Earth, and intelligent life, extraterrestrial civilizations, which is what I think grabs most people's attention. That's another story. I can come back to that, doing too much talking.
Yeah, I think,
someone else.
Well, first of all, sorry, Tim and Jose, that this was abruptly ended, but yeah, we're still here, and hopefully we'll carry on without no more technical issues, but I guess that they just come with the same thing. So what I wanted to say, before that happened, it was, well, I know, Avi, you have slightly different views on this than Paul's. So he has mentioned that perhaps intelligent life is not that common, and I want to hear your views on that.
Right. So my view is that it's arrogant on our behalf to assume that we are privileged, unique, or special. I mean, that's the view that my daughters took when they were infants. When they were young, they thought, they are the center of the world, are the smartest around, because all the data they had was close to them. And we get our data initially at a young age when it's close to our body. That's the data. And then we get the wrong impression that the world is centered on us. And by the way, it's not just kids. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle argued that we are at the center of the world. And humanity for 1,000 years believed him, because this virtual reality flatters our ego. And so the philosophers during the days of Galileo put him in house arrest when he argued, no, the earth moves around the sun. They didn't like that notion. Today, they would have canceled him on social media. And I think it's really arrogant of us to believe that what we find around us is unique or privileged, because whenever we did that in the past, we were proven wrong. We are not at the center of the universe. The Earth-Sun system is pretty common. So the starting point should be that everything we see is common. Things around us are common. They are not rare. We are not privileged. We are not the smartest kid on the cosmic block. And starting from that premise, we should be modest in the sense of let's look for evidence, because science, that's what Galileo taught us that science should be guided by evidence. Now, the other view saying extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Well, let me break the news for you. Extraordinary evidence requires extraordinary funding. It took the National Science Foundation $1.1 billion to invest in LIGO in order for gravitational waves to be detected. If the $1.1 billion were not invested, we would not find gravitational waves. Therefore, it's a circular argument on the part of the mainstream of astronomy to say, we don't have extraordinary evidence, therefore this should not be discussed. It's a speculation. It's not a speculation. We know that half of the sun-like stars have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly the same separation. Okay, it's a common system. And we know that most stars form billions of years before the sun. Therefore, Albert Einstein was not the smartest scientist that existed since the Big Bang took place, 13.8 billion years ago. It's very likely that there was a smarter scientist on a planet other than ours around another star 1 billion years ago. And that civilization that benefited from the knowledge of that smart scientist 1 billion years ago could have populated the entire Milky Way galaxy with probes. How do we find out? It's not by philosophical reasoning, it's by looking out and collecting evidence. And by the way, this question, in my view, is more exciting, more important than searching for the nature of dark matter. Because in principle, we can learn about the nature of dark matter by asking an extraterrestrial that has that knowledge, rather than trying to do experiments for decades now without finding the evidence for dark matter. So my point is simple. We should invest funds in the search. And right now, we are looking for microbes. Of course, that flatters our ego as well. If we find a microbe on Mars, even though I know Jim Green wrote a set of rules for how to, how much credence do we need to give such a finding, it still maintains our superiority. The microbe is not intelligent, we can feel superior, it doesn't threaten our ego in any way. Just like my daughters didn't want to go to the kindergarten, they were pretty happy with the notion, that there are ants at home. The ants are less intelligent than they are. If we find microbes on Mars, that doesn't threaten our ego. But just imagine the Perseverance rover bumping into the wreckage of a spaceship that represents technologies far more advanced than NASA developed so far. That would be a blow to our ego, just like it was to the ego of those philosophers that put Galileo in house arrest. So my point is, we should aim higher than microbes, okay? We should look for equipment that around in the vicinity of Earth or in the solar system that may represent a smarter kid on our cosmic block.
I think I want to ask you, Tim, your views on this, because I think you have a point to make, but I also want to throw another question so we don't get too much on the same thing. So would we, if we bump into this space, say a spacecraft, would be able to identify it? Do we? I mean, because we couldn't expect we couldn't expect it to be nearly even similar to a space shuttle. So, yeah. James, if you want to answer this question, and then we can carry on.
Well, I really think that's an important line of reasoning. When you look at what NASA is doing, we indeed are developing our spacecraft. We have several that have left the heliosphere or are about to leave the heliosphere. They are moving fast enough to break the gravitational pull of our sun and will be out between the stars. And indeed, the Voyagers right now are actually measuring, the winds of other stars. So the concept of having our probes be the first line of measurements is really the process that NASA takes. And when you look at the pioneers that broke the gravity bounds of our sun, and then the Voyagers, and then New Horizon, each and every one of those have gone through a revolution in computer technologies, capabilities, and in fact, building intelligent machines, building using artificial intelligence. We're really working hard on that topic right now. Our rovers on Mars are done with a variety of small amounts of intelligence, bringing that information in, making decisions, and then moving ahead. And that then tells us we're going to want to keep doing that. So it's not, to me, unlikely that if intelligent life wants to visit us, they would do it first with their artificial intelligence. You know, it's all about surveying the area. This is also the philosophy planetary science had. You know, we launch probes everywhere, doing a variety of things, and it may look chaotic, but it really isn't. There's a methodology. It's flyby, where we first take a look at something, see how valuable it is, and then orbit. We want to get into orbit, study it further. High resolution imaging allows us then, 3, to land, rove, and return samples. So that methodology we've done with the moon. We're in the process of doing that with Mars, and there's many other objects in the solar system that we will continue to do that.
I mean, interesting. And I think question comes to mind when talking about this is, okay, we can search for something, but what is that something? What is it? How do we actually know what is it that we are looking for? Because you can, I mean, if you don't really know what is it that you're trying to find, well, you will probably find nothing. Or
I'll jump in here because
yes, of course.
I'd like to say something because Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction writer, famously said that a sufficiently advanced technology would be indistinguishable from magic. And some years ago, I was teaching a course at Arizona State University on Seti, and an undergraduate in the class got him to do a project based on some research he was doing. And he was part of the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter data analysis. So this is a satellites mapping the moon to half-meter resolution. And the question is, you know, can it detect signs of technology on the moon? And the answer is absolutely yes. It has detected intelligent activity on the moon through the various spacecraft there, and could even detect astronaut tracks and things of that sort. But could it detect alien technology? So then the question is, how do we go about this? Do we have a room full of undergraduates? And actually they are here. They get paid $10 an hour to look at pictures of the moon and spot if there's anything interesting. They're not looking for crashed spacecraft. They're looking for lava tubes and things like that. But it raises the question, could you automate this? Could you write some, or employ an AI is the way you would express it now, train it to look for signs of non-human technology on the moon? It seems like a sensible thing to do, but you immediately hit the problem that we can only program such a thing by analogy with our own technology. You know, straight edges, for example, might stand out. But that raises a very deep philosophical issue, because if you just think in a few thousand years, we've gone from the bow and arrow to the Large Hadron Collider. They don't look anything like each other. Imagine 1 million years, or 10 million years, or 500 million years. What would technology be like? And what I've tried to do in my earlier book, Are We Alone? I made a list of assumptions we make about technology. There's a difference between the inside and the outside, you know, very, very basic things. And said, we're supposed to drop all those assumptions. And be completely open-minded what to look for. We need to think about the unthinkable in that way. So I just wanted to make that point, because I think it's a deep philosophical one.
Well, if I can add a footnote to the wise remarks by Paul, my footnote is, you know, if you imagine a cave dweller finding a cell phone, the cave dweller, you know, could argue that it's a rock that is shiny of a type that we've never seen before, okay? But if the cave dweller is curious, the cave dweller might press a button and record his voice and then realize that it's actually not a rock. Okay, so my point is, if we find, and by the way, this is the question that the Galileo project that I'm leading is addressing. if we find something, an object, how do we tell that it's of extraterrestrial technological origin? Well, the only thing we need to do is what Sherlock Holmes did, which is to rule out the other possibilities. So what are the other possibilities? That it's a natural object. So we need to rule out that it's an atmospheric phenomenon, that it's a rock of any type that you can think of, a nitrogen iceberg, a hydrogen iceberg, any type of rock that you can think of. We can rule it out with a megapixel image. It's not a matter of imagining what this object is. We just need to rule out that it's a rock. If it has bolts and screws on it, it's not a rock. I don't care. The caveman does not need to understand what the cell phone is made of. The caveman just needs to understand that it's not a rock. And that's the goal of the Galileo project. Okay, so natural objects out. If we rule that out, we just need to rule out one more thing, that it's a human-made piece of equipment. And we pretty much know what NASA launched, okay? And therefore, if we see an object moving at a tenth of the speed of light near Earth, okay? We know that NASA doesn't launch such things, okay? So if we rule out a human-made object and we rule out a natural object, it doesn't look like a rock. Whatever is left, as Sherlock Holmes said, must be the truth. That's it.
Again, that's a good point. And I think this has made me think about something that Jose said when we asked him about the same question, whether we are alone or not. And he, if I could quote you, you said, probably not. That implies that it's a probability in the end, obviously. So, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? What's the factors intervening in this probability for you?
Sorry, you were asking me about the.
Oh, I meant Jose. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but yeah, again, can be a question for everyone. Yeah.
Thank you, Joaquin. And first of all, I would like to thank you, organizers, for inviting me. I'm delighted to be part of this panel. Secondly, my English is a bit rusty, although I never had a good accent. Anyway, there in Manchester, you have had and still you will have many Argentine football players, so you are familiar with the Argentine accent. Going to your question, the question that is not only yours, but it's humanity. Since almost the beginning, when we start to think like the Greek philosophers, it's a very old question. And Aristotle was not the only philosopher, Greek philosopher. There is a very good book on the history of the debate of extraterrestrial intelligent life by Michael Crowley, where, for example, the Epicureans, they had a position on the plurality of the words. So, and I also like very much the title of these events, Universal Dialogues. Maybe one day it will be Cosmic Dialogues, because perhaps sometime we hope to talk or to have a dialogue with ET. Going to my answer, I said probably not, because I think that in the community there are like two extreme positions. Life, intelligent life, is very rare, unique, like on Earth. It's maybe the only case. Or in the other side, people may think that it's imperative. Life, there is in every corner of the universe, there is life. I prefer to think that the reality is in the middle. That life is not so common, and if we see us, I'm not a specialist on this, but if we see the big history of humanity, beginning since the Big Bang, we see that it's a process. Life is a complicated process, and also to arrive to intelligent life, even more difficult. So for that reason, I believe that intelligent life is not so common, but in any case, I believe that there are someone there that can think the universe. We live in a thinking universe that can think the universe, the reality, maybe with different categories, but still he or she or whatever it is will have scientific and cultural categories, because we have to assume that there would be some kind of universal language or grammar. Otherwise, communication would be impossible.
I think, yeah, thank you for that. That actually raises some interesting questions, whether on the universality of the life, let's say, and perhaps one of the main ones that we can also discuss is what rules us on what we are made of, which is in essence chemistry becoming biology at some point. And I think, James, you discussed this in one of your TED Talks quite interestingly, which is the different systems where chemical systems were could eventually led to life. So where does, for example, this places the Drake equation, which places has a huge emphasis, let's say, in looking for Earth-like planets or Earth-like conditions as opposed to whatever else is out there?
Well, indeed, in planetary science, one of the key things that we've been doing is indeed studying our own solar system. We do a variety of measurements in a very methodical way, as I mentioned, but aspects of that in terms of looking for life beyond Earth really for NASA involves looking at how planets have evolved. We are so lucky at this time to be well situated from the sun with a wonderful climate that has allowed complex life to absolutely explode. But that particular condition may have also existed elsewhere in the solar system at an earlier time, such as at Venus. So by studying our planets, what's happened on Venus could happen on Earth. What's happened on Mars could happen on Earth. Comparative planetology has been going on now for several decades that NASA's been doing. And those concepts also are enabling us in this tremendously exciting era of looking at exoplanets and trying to understand what's happening with them, what their size is, what their composition in terms of their atmosphere. And we're moving more and more in the direction to be able to study these in really important ways. As was already discussed a little bit, what about technologies? Well, a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to work with astrophysics to have a workshop on techno signatures. What should we or could we actually look at in terms of exoplanets and what that could tell us about potential life on the planet and even perhaps intelligent life? The concept of looking at a solar system which has 3 terrestrial planets separated such that they're in different locations relative to what we call the canonical habitable zone, and then yet finding them with all the same atmospheric conditions, gives us the opportunity to really quiz whether life started on one of those planets and then moved to other planets and then made those habitable. The ability to look at the far side of a planet during an eclipse or before an eclipse and see artificial light, see signatures that, as Avi mentioned, we could rule out nature, gives us information about the potential for intelligent life. There's all kinds of things going on in this area. So it's a wonderful time to be involved in planetary comparisons, both with our solar system, but also with exoplanets. And within our own solar system, what we're finding is early on, there were enough greenhouse gases on Venus, Earth, and Mars that they all started out pretty much as blue planets 4 billion years ago. Life could have started on Venus just as well as it could have started on Earth. That's some of the current thinking that's going on. And perhaps life had come and gone on Venus in the intervening 4.6 billion years ago. And then, of course, Mars losing its magnetic field. We know it had a significant amount of water. We see the stripping going on right now with the solar wind. And what was Mars like in its past? And so, indeed, as we continue to look at the geology, continue to create rock records through our samples that we take, bringing them back to Earth and study of them, we might be able to find indications of past life. And indeed, if life started on other locations, now we've made a major step forward in thinking about how universal life might be in the rest of the universe. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that also has come to mind, and is, okay, let's take, we eventually find ancient microbes on Mars, even Venus, or just traces of it that could somehow, to a reasonable point, confirm that there is microbial life on Mars. But let's imagine that in 1,000 years, lots of funding, this stays the same way. What would be the implications of that, or of answering the "are we alone" question? Yes. No, because we are not really alone. We might be surrounded by microbes, but we really are, because we are not. We couldn't be in contact with other civilizations. Would that be, if it's a possibility, what would that imply to us? To just us as being alone on our solar system, and perhaps never visited by other civilizations. Yes, Paul.
Can I just make a point about life on Mars, which Jim sort of hinted at in what he was just saying a while ago, that we know that Mars and Earth are not quarantined from each other because they exchange rocks, and this happens because of impact ejecta. Comets and asteroids smash into these planets with enough force to splatter rocks all around the solar system. And we know that cocooned inside a rock, a microbe could easily make the journey from Earth to Mars or Mars to Earth. I say we know that. When I suggested that in the early 1990s, everybody laughed and said it was crazy, but now it's pretty much accepted that this type of transfer of microorganisms is inevitable, possibly from Venus to Earth in the early days as well. So what we would really like is to go to Mars, find either obviously living microbes would be great, but even evidence of dead microbes. But what we want is life, but not as we know it. We want to find some alternative form of life to say it's happened twice. I made this point earlier. We don't actually have to go to Mars. If it turned out to happen twice here on Earth, if there's something like a shadow biosphere, we could say the transition from non-life to life is a pretty easy one. At the moment, we have a sample of only one, and we don't know. It would be great to go to Mars and find a second sample, but we may get there, find life, and it's just boring old Earth life that's been splashed around a bit. So this is a really key point. We need that second genesis before we can move forward.
Well, as Paul, you said, we have been looking for that second genesis and haven't found it. And perhaps that's telling us that the life, our type of life, is a dominant form, there's something about it that is so pervasive on this planet that a second genesis, which could have started more than once, has been snuffed out. So those are some of the things that have to be thought about in terms of looking at life on other planets and comparing that with our own.
Well, actually, we haven't looked very hard on Earth for a second genesis. It's and it's entirely likely, as you say, that a dominant form of life snuffs out the rest. But I think that there's still a possibility of looking in niches that are beyond the reach of known life to see if there's anything living there. I'm thinking deep ocean volcanic vents with temperatures above 130, say something like that. It's worth a look. It's a long shot, but it doesn't cost much.
It is. Please submit a proposal to NASA.
Okay. Could I make a comment on what we heard? So I would like to shift the conversation from focusing on microbes, because once again, we are obsessed with creatures that are less intelligent than we are, okay? And that's a natural tendency, as I was saying all along. And my point is, you know, if we search, like NASA is planning to do, if we search for gases in the atmospheres of planets that are indicative of microbial life, and people often say that with a huge amount of effort that will take us, that will cost tens of billions of dollars, we will be able to tell from a transit of a planet around a star, you know, we will be able to tell whether there is oxygen or methane in the atmosphere of a planet. Now, if you look at the Earth, there was not much oxygen in the first 2 billion years, okay? But there were lots of microbes. So if we don't find oxygen, it doesn't tell us that there is no life there. And if we do find, it could be also a natural consequence of some geological processes. And my point is, if we find industrial pollution, okay, not only that it will tell us that there is life, if we find those molecules that are responsible for the depletion of the ozone layer on Earth that are produced by refrigerating systems and industries, it will also tell us that there is industrial life. And another, that is a paper I wrote in 2015, but another paper, and by the way, the strange thing, you would never hear that from the people that advocate for these super advanced spectrographs in a decade or two that will cost us tens of billions of dollars. They will never talk about industrial pollution, because that's outside of what is considered the adults in the room's discussion. Okay, now, the second thing I wanted to advocate, let me finish. The second thing is a paper I wrote just a few months ago. The James Webb Space Telescope can search for city lights on the night side of Proxima b. Okay, here is the nearest star, Proxima Centauri, to the solar system. It has a planet in the habitable zone. Most likely the planet is tidally locked. It has a permanent day side and a permanent night side. My daughters would like, if we ever move there, they want to have a house on the strip that separates the two, because then you can see the sunset forever. But if there is an intelligent civilization out there, they would put photovoltaic cells on the day side and transfer the electricity to the night side, because it's cold and dark there forever. And if you want to be there, you better illuminate it artificially. So let's check. And my point is, those signatures are not looking for microbes. They're looking for something bigger and better than microbes, okay? And sometimes those signatures are much more easy for us to pick up than oxygen in an atmosphere of a planet like the Earth in the first 2 billion years. Okay, and
can I make a few remarks in defense of microbes? I think the transition from a mishmash of chemicals to a microbe is much bigger than the transition from a microbe to an intelligent civilization.
I agree, but my point is as follows, Paul, that you might be able to search over a much bigger volume if you're looking for technological signatures than you are in the context of microbes. And as a result, you might have a better chance of picking up something. If within a volume of, let's say, tens of thousands of light years, there happens to be a smarter kid, okay, that produces signals that are easy to pick up, then you would see that kid rather than looking for microbes on Mars. Okay, and so what we should do is both. But in terms of one thing I wanted to emphasize, in terms of improving our imagination, we shouldn't let nature do it for us. I mean, if you look at the history of physics over the past century, the laws of physics were uncovered in the laboratory. And once we understood quantum mechanics, other laws of physics, we were able to apply them to the universe at large. Okay, and we can do the same thing with life. We can produce synthetic life in the laboratory under very different conditions, and that would expand our imagination to life as we don't know it, life that was not produced in the soup of chemicals here on Earth, but was produced under different circumstances. So in order to improve our imagination, just like in the context of the history of physics, we can do that through laboratory experiments in the history of astrobiology. That's my point.
Right. Well, Avi, I think you're right in that, in the sense that once we really got hold of some solid understanding of looking for techno signatures, and indeed CFCs in the atmosphere is one of those techno signatures, but also large structures, also the ability to provide in front of a planet at its Lagrangian point, the ability to modulate the light that it receives, that then enables the planet to continue on being habitable because of the climate engineering that's going on by intelligent life, is all real connected. And as we get to that ability, that means then we want to be able in our transits to be looking for moons. And in fact, that's what's happened. We've now, we believe, seen the second moon in some of our data. We're going to get better at that. We want to be able to look for large structures. That's an element of our understanding of how an intelligent civilization will prevail as their suns evolve and as they must to be able to survive moving from planet to planet or containing the habitability of a planet for longer than its normal evolution. These are all important and new ideas that have come out over the last handful of years that are just really stimulating, really exciting, and that NASA indeed has started to fund.
Agreed.
I just want to make one quick point, and then I think Salma's going to take over for a while. We just got a really interesting comment, Avi, on what you had just said, and is that perhaps is I mean, searching for city lights or light pollution, by saying so, perhaps you're also assuming that those beings, just like us, are going to require light to move in the darkness, and they are just not able to persist as they are in the dark side of Proxima b in this case. So, well, I mean, the story was interesting. So I don't know if you have any views on it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And in fact, I published a commentary on this in The Hill last week on this city lights search. And one thing I jokingly said was, the planet Proxima b moves around every 11.2 days. So birthday parties are celebrated 30 times more frequently on that planet than on Earth, okay? So if they use a lot of light in those birthday parties, we should celebrate. If we pick up those lights with the James Webb Space Telescope, it will be a reason for celebration. So then the US military tweeted about my essay in The Hill just a few days ago, and they said, how do we know that they celebrate birthday parties? Well, that was just a joke.
Well, there are a couple points there that are also really important. We think about seeing light, or at least sensing light, because when we look at evolution of life here on Earth, the invention of eyes is really a seminal event. It's really the ability for one species to recognize variations in the electromagnetic spectrum that it's receiving, and then interpreting them or using them either as a mechanism for growth or finding food or defense. And so it's a natural thought that intelligent life would have the ability to sense changes in the electromagnetic spectrum.
Yes,
but it's predicated on our own evolution.
I just wanted to comment that the reason I wrote this essay in The Hill was a podcast interview that I had with Terry Virts, who was the commander of the International Space Station and spent 7 months in space. And he told me at the interview 2 weeks ago, he said to me that, in fact, looking at the Earth from space, if you look at the night side, you can see that city lights demark the boundaries of continents. And moreover, you can tell something about world politics by seeing some areas that are more lit than other areas, even though they're equally populated by humans. And I was thinking that, the next telescope that NASA should develop should allow us to figure out the edges of continents on another planet like Proxima b, and also their internal politics.
You're exactly right. And Avi, I need to send you the book that I was involved in with Mike Freilich before he passed away. And that book is called Earth at Night, where we went through the archive of fabulous observations that many of the NASA satellites take and created that. And that's available, of course, also for others at www.nasa.gov. But those are important concepts. They really are, and they're spurring a lot of really exciting new thinking and new sets of observations that can be made to be able to do that. But of course, you know, we have to take methodical steps as we go along. The ability to have high resolution imaging down to the size of a Earth or super Earth, you know, many hundreds of light years away is still a little ways off. But indeed, the sensing aspects of the atmosphere, we believe we can do. James Webb will start doing that, but even bigger telescopes will be needed. So your point about additional funds, of course, we're at that stage where we will continue to use NASA's budget appropriately to go after these tough questions and try to answer them.
Jim, I should tell you that I compare NASA's budget to the defense bill signed by President Biden a month ago, and the defense bill was $768 billion, okay? Roughly $1 trillion a year to defend the US against adversaries, against other people. If you think about it, just like kids playing in the playground, you know, with each other and using those toy trucks, you know, like we are defending against other people. But if you think about the big picture, if there is a smarter, like if there is a real truck passing on the road next to us, you know, we should allocate $1 trillion a year to figure out the neighborhood that we live in. And so what I'm saying is you should dream about a NASA budget that is 100 times bigger.
Could I make a comment about money and in defense of Avi's philosophy, really? And I used to enjoy conversations on these topics over the years with Freeman Dyson, who was a great visionary. And he articulated the philosophy that when it comes to doing speculative science, you do what you can do. You don't worry too much about how likely is it you're going to succeed or how plausible is the hypothesis. If you can do something and do it relatively cheaply, why not do it anyway? Just give it a go. And that's how I felt about looking for artifacts, alien artifacts on the moon. Do we expect to find them? Well, no, it's a huge long shot. Does it cost anything? No, it costs nothing because those pictures are free on the internet. Anybody can look. So you do what you can do in this type of science. So, you know, been a great advocate of trying crazy things.
Well, Paul, just as an aside, let me mention that that is a great topic. I have really enjoyed looking at NASA's history of things that have gone to the moon, and the moon's gravity is so lumpy that anything that gets into orbit comes down. And in fact, we've identified at least 30 satellites and other human-made material that's laying on the surface of the moon where we do not know where they are at.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
I hope you don't mind me just jumping in for a second. So with you guys talking about the politics and the budget, I was thinking that it's actually quite important when speaking about finding ET life to actually consider the implications that these things have on like our societies, our communities, and even our countries. And I know that Jose is actually quite in tune with these kinds of things because he receives comments from both the science community and the religious communities. So I just wanted to ask you, Jose, what you think these implications could be that, let's say we do find ET life, what do you think that there are any sorts of implications that could transcend, like, for example, countries, even if there are like religious countries that don't believe that the data that we are obtaining is correct and that causes some issues? Do you think that that is possibly something that could happen and something that should be addressed?
Thank you for your question, Salma. Yes, I've been thinking when you were talking about money, especially, that this always seems to be the big problem. Well, as you know, I used to live in the Vatican and also I used to live in Tucson, Arizona. Then I moved to this part of the world, Argentina, where we don't have many resources. So as Paul was mentioning, you have to be very creative because you don't have money. So you have to think a lot and to be creative and do what you can do. So I started a project here we call Project Other because we think it's a kind of think tank with researchers from astronomy, biology, philosophy, and theology. And one of the topics we address is the role of spirituality in the search of extraterrestrial life, intelligent life. And we are talking about the bio-friendly universe, an intelligent-friendly universe, but I was interested in this question, if we live in a spiritual-friendly universe. So the question is, I believe, and we can discuss this for a long time, that we are spiritual beings. So the question is, are we spiritual creatures, spiritual beings? Is spirituality emerged as a part necessary, as part of evolution, of something else happened? And we have done a survey to ask if spirituality is a kind of driving force for the search of extraterrestrial life. I'm now working at the Jesuit University here in Cordoba, but because we are part of a network of Jesuit universities in the world, we have done surveys on this topic in California, at Santa Clara, in Mexico, and in Bogota, and also here in Cordoba, with grad students, with undergrad students from different majors. And we asked them if they believe that there is intelligent life, in other words, if we should allocate resources to the search of extraterrestrial intelligent life, and if they believe that there are other civilizations, and finally, if they want to send a message, what kind of message? And they wrote many things, of course, as you can imagine. So there are many implications in philosophy and in religion for this. And we describe in a paper we published in Science, Theology and Science what we understand by a spiritual being. And I'm going to reduce to three categories for the sake of the survey. And those are the ability to understand science, the altruism, and a religious attitude. With that, try to measure that. What is very difficult, because one question is there any metric to measure spirituality? That's a very difficult thing to do. In any way, most of the students, they believe that there is a extraterrestrial intelligent life. And regarding if we should allocate resources to that, they say, well, it depends. Not everybody agrees on that. There are also, I think, implications for philosophy. What kind of thinking, what kind of epistemological categories we use when we approach life or extraterrestrial life or intelligence. And also, I don't think there will be a crisis in religious people if tomorrow we talk to ET. I don't think so. We have overcome much worse crisis than that would be. And in advantage, I would say for a religious person, it would provide a cosmic perspective. Now we have a mindset that is too much Earth-centric, as Sarah Seeger said once, I guess, the next Copernican revolution would be the discovery of extraterrestrial life. I think humanity is prepared. That would be, I think, the last question I'm anticipating. And I don't foresee a big crisis in religious communities. I don't know if I answered your question. Sorry.
Could I just make a comment on that? So I very much sympathize with what Jose said. And actually, a couple of months ago, I attended a forum in the Washington National Cathedral, okay, which is sort of the main church in Washington, D.C., okay? And on the panel was Jeff Bezos. And he was talking about the business plan of space tourism that he was inspired to pursue as a result of watching Star Trek as a kid. And I was telling the person sitting next to me, Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, I was telling her, I was never impressed by Star Trek because the storyline violates the laws of physics. And she said, we have to work on you, Avi. But my point is, you know, going out of the solar system has no business plan. That's what I was thinking when I listened to Jeff Bezos. There is no business plan. There is no commercial benefit in leaving the solar system. You cannot make money out of that. The only reason for doing that is spiritual. Studying the unknown, trying to figure out our place in the universe, which, you know, by the way, should come with a sense of modesty. So space tourism, you know, all these wealthy individuals that half a year ago lifted their body, you know, just 1% of the Earth radius, and were, you know, they felt very proud of themselves. That's not very impressive. You know, using their wealth, they went on a craft that was 1% above ground level, 1% of the Earth radius. You know, the universe is 10 to the power 19 times bigger than the Earth radius. So, you know, showing off in space is an oxymoron. And rather than trying to demonstrate, you know, a point about yourself in going to space, you should do exactly the opposite, trying to learn, you know, out of a sense of modesty, what the neighborhood includes, rather than say, I'm important. You're not important. It's the other way around. And that's the reason for going to space, to learn out of a sense of modesty, out of spirituality, about what is not known to you. Okay, and the other footnote I would add is, you know, when my book came out a year ago, there was a cover story in a magazine called Ami of the Orthodox community in Brooklyn, New York. And a colleague of mine at Harvard, Stephen Greenblatt, who studies Shakespeare, he said, it looks like the Orthodox are more open-minded than your colleagues. So I would argue that, in fact, spiritual people are more open-minded to studying the unknown than scientists.
Could I join the conversation and ask Jose a theological question then? Because I think these are really interesting issues that have been debated in the Christian community, at least, for many centuries. And Christianity differs from Judaism, Islam, and the other world religions in one important respect in this regard, which is the belief in the uniqueness of the incarnation. And this was well expressed by a theologian physicist who I knew very well, that did God take on little green flesh to save little green men? And this problem goes right to the heart of Christianity. Christianity is based on salvation. And so who gets to be saved? You know, Homo sapiens gets to be saved. We already have a problem with other hominin species. But what about advanced extraterrestrial beings who, by our standards, might be like truly saintly beings? They may have overcome a lot of their sort of adolescent aggression and so on, and have created wonderful societies. Are they not to be saved? And within the theology of Christianity, how is salvation to work for these communities? This is not a new question, hundreds of years old, but I have yet to hear a clear answer. I'd like Jose to answer that question for me.
Thank you we have many problems. That's not the only one. Anyway, there is a book I'm going to promote, part of the book or the whole book, I mean, Astrotheology, that is edited by Ted Peters. He's a theologian, a Lutheran theologian. And I have a chapter on that book, and I discuss precisely that point. First of all, I always say that I am an astronomer and amateur theologian. I have studied more astronomy, maybe, I hope so, than theology. So I have an idea. This is what my answer to your question. Probably is not the only answer, is the answer I arrived after some time of thinking about it. So, as you mentioned, is essential point of Christianity is the incarnation of the Son of God, that he became man in flesh and bone. This is what we believe. But before saying that, I would like to say, and I think this is very important too, especially in these decades, that we as Christians, we have many things in common with other religions, especially with Muslims and Jewish, because all of us, we believe in one God and the Creator. So there we have something in common. We are part of more or less of the same religious tradition. So this is a point that we have in common. And also, religious people, we have many things in common with non-religious people. I would like to always, I say that in each of us, there is a believer and a no-believer. In me, there is also a no-believer. So it's good to have a dialogue, a conversation with other religious traditions, with non-believers. I think one thing we need to do, because you know, Paul, you're much aware of this, there is a dialogue between science and religion, but there is not much dialogue between science and non-religious tradition. Well, now I'm going to answer your question. I like to think more and more in terms of the big history. For example, one of the most known author on this is David Christian. So there is this big history. And the other thing we need to consider is the encounter that wasn't very happy and caused a lot of suffering. For example, the crash, the cultural crash between European and Native Americans. This is another kind of fact that I would like to consider. So the incarnation is unique. In I'm talking now not on behalf of the Catholic Church. I'm not now. I don't have any official position. But what I'm saying is, I think, is in agreement with the Catholic tradition. So we believe that Jesus, the Son of God, became man in one special moment in this universe. Maybe there are others, there is the multiverse, but in this universe, and especially in one particular time, about 2,000 years ago, and in particular country, Israel. This is what happened, and more or less is proved historically. So let's let's move some centuries, and when the Europeans, Catholics, I'm talking now in the Catholic tradition, met the Native Americans, even they doubt about the human nature of the Native Americans. So it was a big crisis to rethink the Catholic faith in the light of this new discovery. That was a problem. A problem similar that we would face if we find ET. Let's say that we find ET. One simple way to explain this, of course, limited my explanation, is that Jesus becoming man has joined every human being in history, before him and after him. If you're Catholic or you're not Catholic. And he brings salvation to everyone. You don't need to be baptized in the Catholic Church to be saved. That wasn't the understanding a few centuries ago. We have changed, we have study and meet many people. So the Catholic Church have changed the comprehension of the baptism, for example. And everyone would be saved if they act according to their conscience. You don't need to be baptized. So let's say that there is another, and we are sinners, that's the other thing, but I think I don't have to prove much that the humanity lack, or whatever you want to call the human beings are sinners. I mean, we don't do well, and this is a fact. We have many problems, and we cause many sufferings in the world. So to be saved, you need to be a sinner somehow. Otherwise, you don't need to be saved. You live in friendship with God. Let's assume that there are other intelligent beings. Father Seti, a Jesuit, he was astronomer. He was one of the first, if not the first, to classify stars according to the spectra. He believed that there were other beings, intelligent beings, around other planets. He lived at the end of the 19th century. So if there are other beings, we don't know. First, we don't know. Second, we don't know if in their freedom they have sinned, because they very well they may live in friendship with God. Anyhow, let's assume that they are sinners like us. In the same way that Jesus, being Jewish, has joined an American, an Argentine, and a Spaniard, a Chinese. Why not? He could join spiritually, I mean, ET. Sometime I gave an interview that made the headlines. St. Francis used to call Brother Sun, Sister Moon, Brother Wolf. Why not? We could say Brother ET. So that would be my explanation to this question that is essential to Christianity. And the other side, for theologians, this challenge of extraterrestrial intelligence help us or them to rethink our faith in the incarnation. This is what
could I raise a weakness in this explanation? Could I bring up a weakness?
There are many, not only one, but there are many.
There is one simple weakness in this explanation. The weakness is that 2,000 years is just one part in 10 million of the age of the universe. And we know by observing the universe that most stars formed before the last 2,000 years. Most stars, not just small fraction of the stars. So that means that there could have been beings long before Jesus came to exist. Who saved them if Jesus was not around? They died by now. They sinned. Let's imagine that they sinned and died. Nobody saved them for 13.8 billion years. Then Jesus comes in the last 2,000 years. Who cares about? Like all these beings that were there before were never saved. Isn't that a weakness, a problem?
I probably my explanation I missed that point, but Jesus saved everyone. I think I said it before him and after him.
But they are not around, so he cannot save them.
Well, that's what we believe. That is a Catholic faith. That is what we believe. You cannot prove it like a scientific method. It's not an experiment. I'm not going to do an experiment. It's a different way of thinking, which is different. It's not better or worse than the scientific method. Just okay. Different.
So no, but I just want to understand.
Let me address another point. Let me address another point. I miss it, but just to tell you that this is a complex issue, even in theology. There is a famous German Catholic Jesuit, nobody's perfect, Karl Rahner. Karl Rahner proposed in a many world scenario with many other beings that I don't like that explanation, and then I will tell you why. But he proposed that the God, the Son of God, incarnated in different civilizations, different planets. He was jumping from one from the other. I don't like that explanation.
Well,
because
I think Giordano Bruno was burnt on a stake.
I
because of this reason, people said it doesn't make sense to jump from one planet to another if there are habitable planets around other stars. So they burned him. They just burned him.
I don't justify the execution, and nobody should be burned because of his or her ideas. Let's say that. And it was more complex. It wasn't burned for exactly that, because, for example, Saint Albert the Great had some ideas about the studying life in the universe was a marvelous thing to do. So, but just let me explain. I don't like the explanation of Karl Rahner because it's too complicated. It's already difficult and complicated to believe in incarnation, but we need to multiply several incarnations. So for simplicity, for also to have an elegant solution, if you want, I prefer to think, and this is in agreement with the Catholic tradition, I prefer to think in a unique event in the whole history of the universe.
Can I just cut off for a second? So actually,
well, you were the one who started us.
Yeah. Technically, yes, but I will still relate it because someone in YouTube commented the following question, which is actually related. They said, if we found signs, how do you tell the public without the whole world going insane? And I feel like just within just a few people, there has already been disparity when talking about like ET life. And I kind of wanted to direct this question to Jim because, you know, a former chief scientist at NASA, and NASA is not probably the largest space organization. And if a large space organization like NASA were to find, you know, a huge biosignature or evidence for extraterrestrial life, how do you think NASA would go about you know, publicizing that kind of information while still trying to maintain peace between people who may have differing opinions about it?
That's a very fascinating question in the sense that many of us in NASA have been thinking about that. As we look at the conditions on Mars today, perhaps there's microbial life in the aquifers. Perhaps Mars had life in its past, perhaps Venus has had life in its past. The telescopes that we're developing that will be looking for all sorts of techno signatures and other signals in atmospheres that may tell us about how habitable planets are. We're moving rapidly, I think, to enhance the knowledge that we have. And the key to that is, and I was asked by a reporter not too long ago, what I thought about, is the public ready for an announcement of that we had found life? And it didn't take me but a second to say, I don't think we are. We have a lot to do in terms of educating the public on how we are looking, what we are finding, how to interpret what we are finding. The concepts of looking for life that we're involved in is in many ways remote sensing, and the remote sensing gives us a view, but not a comprehensive view necessarily. We need to add other data. So announcements that come out that say, oh, we think we've found a biosignature that may indicate life, and yet it doesn't hold up scientifically, is very much, I think, a disservice to what we do in terms of communicating accurately to the public. We give them a false impression. It's going to require a methodical approach that develops over time, where each and every step that we make builds a level of confidence in what we are saying. And that's also important in terms of having NASA focus on what's the next steps. You know, if we've made these measurements, we can't tell it's life, but what are the next set of steps that we need to do? That will be the next mission. That will be the next level of activity. And so indeed, that is an approach that we are now taking. We're talking to the science community at large that NASA funds on what those steps are, and then how can we use that process to also inform the public of the progress that we're making. Identify when real progress is made, that we can enjoy the fruits of that next step in the right way, and not oversell it, but be yet methodical until we reach the goal of finding life beyond Earth. So I think we have a ways to go in that area.
I'm just curious, I wanted to ask, so do you think, or rather, is there currently in a space organization like NASA, are there any protocols that are in place? So if, let's say, somehow we find something that we can say this is ET life tomorrow, is there a protocol in place in publicizing that information?
Good question. In that we've started that process right now. I proposed a year or so ago to create a scale. The scale is called confidence of life detection, where an initial observation of a biosignature might be level 1, cold meaning confidence of life detection, whereas 7 would be the set of measurements built on all the previous measurements that give us a definitive answer. Now, that scale is something that's being hotly debated right now. It's being discussed at the National Academy of Science. How is it being interpreted? Well, many scientists think that this is the right approach that will help them when they publish something to then be able to turn in their paper and describe, well, this is the progress we've made, but we still have a much more to do, in a way that we can communicate between scientists and scientists, but also communicate to the public. And in that, we have to have some semblance of making it a simple but comprehensive step. And so that's the concept behind the cold scale. There are also other scientists that believe that, well, nothing's broke. We're going to let our scientists say they've seen life because they made their first indication of a biosignature. It's like, to me, an astrophysicist says, I see oxygen in the atmosphere of an Earth-sized planet at the edge of a habitable zone. Therefore, there must be plant life on the surface of the planet. Well, in our own solar system, I know what that planet is. It's Venus. And, it's about the size of the Earth, and it's at the edge of the habitable zone on the inner edge, and it's got oxygen in the atmosphere, and there's no way we've got plant life on the surface. So we also want to guard against overselling what we've done and continue the process of keeping track of where we are and what those next steps are, and bring the public along with us.
If I could add to that, so Jim wrote a very important paper in this context about the cold scale, and the one word to pay attention to is the L, the life. So he's thinking about life, but in my view, it may well be that we will find a piece of equipment with artificial intelligence, near Earth. That has nothing. That's not a living organism, okay? And we could tell that it's not human-made, and we could, in principle, tell that it's not a rock just by taking a high-resolution megapixel image of it, if we come close to it. Okay, so what do we do then? Now, it's very different from finding a microbe on Mars, because you find, first of all, a sign of intelligence in your backyard. You have to act. You cannot just say, okay, this star, the nearest star is 4 light years away. It takes 8 years for a round trip conversation. So when people dealt with the protocol of dealing with radio signals, across the Milky Way galaxy, a radio signal would take tens of thousands of years to cross, right? So there is no urgency. We can have committees that discuss what to do with the signal and so forth. But if you have a piece of equipment that is intelligent, that has artificial, is completely autonomous, and collecting information about us, what do? We have to decide immediately, okay? And there is no protocol about that. There is no cold scale to dealing with that. And there is no organization, international organization, that represents humanity. And even if there was, let me say, suppose we were to decide as humans, by the way, this adheres it doesn't pay attention to borders between nations. This is an international matter. It's not a matter of national security. If we find an object like that above the skies of, above the US, it's not national security. It's a subject that should be of interest to all humans. So even if there was an international organization that represents Earthlings, you could always find a person somewhere that would say, the hell with this organization, I will engage with this thing. And that's a serious matter. We have to decide what to do, right? How to enforce a single voice in dealing with that. I mean, first of all, we need to figure the intent of such an equipment. What kind of information is it seeking, right? How does it respond to what we do? And what its purpose is? And then the question is how to engage with it, because the story about the Trojan horse says you should be careful. Sometimes you misinterpret things. And so I think we haven't really thought about that. And that's, one of the subgroups within the Galileo project is thinking about that. And that's a serious matter. And that's not something that NASA dealt with. It's not something that belongs to the cold scale because there is no L here. There is no life. It's not a matter of informing our colleagues. The question is what to do about it. I mean, if you find microbes on a distant planet around another star, has no effect on our daily lives. But if you find...
Avi, there is such an organization because I chaired it, and it's called the Seti Post-Detection Task Group, and it was set up by the International Academy of Astronautics precisely to deliberate on what do we do next if ET calls. The reason you probably don't know about this is
ET calls. No, I was not talking about radio.
No. Yeah. That was the one in most people's minds, but if we got incontrovertible evidence that we are not...
but that's exactly my point. My point.
But let me finish. The reason that you don't know about this organization is it had no budget. And so, but it did, we spent a lot of time deliberating on, well, what do we do? For example, you pick up a signal. And the feeling.
No, but
Paul, but let me finish. So the feeling initially was, well, it shouldn't be announced until you're absolutely sure that this is not a hoax or a mistake or something of that sort. But it rapidly became clear that in these days of social media and so on, it would be impossible to sit on any sort of discovery. And so anything that looks like it could be sensational is going to leak out in pretty short order. So we perceived that was a problem. But in terms of, what should the response of humanity be and how should the announcement be made, it's all over the place. And it's obvious it's not enforceable. As you've said, there's no way you can enforce it.
No, Paul. So here is my point. That's what I was trying to explain, that there is a clear difference between waiting for a radio signal to be discovered and then announcing it. A radio signal does not require an immediate response. And that was the focus of the Seti community. It's just like trying to have a phone conversation with someone very far away, and it has no immediate implications. There is a clear difference between that and finding an object next to you. And that's my point, that the urgency that is associated with an object in the atmosphere of the Earth or within the orbit of the Earth around the sun, that's something that we have to contemplate, because the Director of National Intelligence reported to Congress in June 2021 that there are objects that we don't fully understand. And as of a month ago, President Biden signed into law the establishment of a new office in government to which funds will be allocated to figure out the nature of these objects. Okay, so the government, which is the most conservative organization, is taking this subject seriously. And former CIA directors, Brennan and Woolsey, former President Barack Obama, the head of NASA, Bill Nelson, in June spoke seriously about it. He said scientists should attend to figuring out the nature of these objects. That's why I established the Galileo project, to figure out the nature of these objects. My point is, if we do find an object that is of extraterrestrial technological origin, which is a possibility, I'm not saying it's likely or unlikely, we just need to look for better evidence, okay? And if we do find it, there is no protocol. This committee that you discussed was thinking about radio signals. That's very different.
Yes.
That's very different.
But we realized it was sort of hopeless, because I don't know if we're going to get around to talk about METI, but, should we be sending messages out? Some people say we shouldn't do this, but it's clearly unenforceable. There's nothing we can do.
No, okay. But I'm saying these discussions, METI or Seti or everything to do with electromagnetic communication is history. What we are discussing right now as a result of the past 6 months, I'm not talking about history, I'm talking about now. The government is establishing an office to study these objects. The head of NASA, Bill Nelson, is talking about these objects that merit scientific inquiry. He says that. The Galileo project is trying to build telescope systems. The first one will be on the roof of the Harvard College Observatory within the coming months. We are talking about a new reality. Okay, past discussions about radio signals are different. What we have to deal with right now is the possibility that some objects that look weird, whose nature is unclear, they may be human-made, they may be natural. That's obviously a possibility. But if we find that they are not, okay, if we find that there's something else, we need to be prepared for that. And I'm saying the past discussions were not dealing with that.
Well, they were dealing with it. The same issues arise as to who makes the announcement and when and what is the cross-check.
That's okay. That's completely secondary. That's completely secondary to me. In my mind, it's just like Hollywood deciding when to put the press announcement on some movie. I mean, the question is more fundamental. The question is, what does humanity do with the knowledge about a piece of equipment manufactured by someone else?
Well, if it's black and white, but as so often in science, there are all sorts of grey areas, and you might well get evidence for something, and you can't be completely sure, and it's better not to announce something until checks have been made, and it's very hard to keep quiet about those things.
I'm not talking about the announcement is completely secondary. Let me repeat that. I'm not talking about public relations here. I'm talking about the substantive issue of what we do with that knowledge.
I may say something,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I agree with Avi. I think it's my opinion or impression is that probably we are going to meet not ET in flesh, but some kind of probe or artificial intelligence. This would be my guess, in case there is intelligent life out there. But also we need to be realistic in this sense. There is something that is very much urgent and immediate, that is the global climate change, which is a big, huge crisis. And we cannot agree on this. So, and this really have a great urgency. And young generations, and here we have some of them, they are very sensitive to this problem. So I'm not saying that this is not important and we need to discuss it, but we need to improve of collaboration between scientists from different parts of the world and different governments or states or people, because who is going to speak on behalf of humanity? This is, or deal with, for example, the crisis with the climate change. These are important issues, and we need, this is what I could do, because it's to work on education. Since the elementary school to college level, I think we scientists have a big challenge in education on these issues that are important because are related to the survival of humanity.
Yeah, I think there are a few points in there, and yeah, on what you were saying, Jose, it's true that if we don't even, and picking up on when you, Avi, and Paul were discussing, if we don't even get to agree on those fundamental things, that it might even seem that obvious. How is that we are going to agree on whether we have actually detected or actually being visited or not? I mean, what you were saying, Avi, that if we want to use that knowledge to take advantage of that knowledge, I guess that we are doing we should do it, as you have said, as well, humanity as a whole. So I guess that you have to not convince, because it's not about convincing, but you have to effectively inform and make everyone aware of this. And so that's, I guess that's perhaps the question.
Yeah, let me address that, because, you know, during the days of Galileo, okay, a lot of people didn't accept his view. Now, did that change the trajectory of the Earth? No. If you were to ask those philosophers that refused to look at his telescope and put him in house arrest, if you were to ask them to design a rocket that will reach Mars, they would get it wrong, because they thought that Mars orbits the Earth, okay? So my point is, it's not about convincing. I don't care if most humanity has the wrong ideas. Most of the time, most people have the wrong ideas. As far as I'm concerned, I just want to know what's going out there. What's going out? You know, are there objects? What is their nature? These objects that the military personnel is reporting about, what are they? That's what I want to. Now, if I have a high resolution megapixel image, it's not a philosophical question. I have the image, I can tell what the objects are, okay? Now, if I have that data, whether I convince another person or not is completely secondary. Whether this information leaks into Twitter is secondary. The question, the fundamental question is, what do we do about it, okay? Given that this is the neighborhood we live in, it's just like you walking down the street and realizing that you have a neighbor while you were sitting at home all the time and thinking, oh, it's only me. I'm the smart and check. Don't look even through the windows. But then at some point you decide, okay, let's take a walk. And then you see, wow, look at that. There is something out there. And then you realize it. Okay, now whether you communicated it to your family, whether your family agrees with you, is completely, I mean, I don't care about this. Whether Twitter likes you, who cares? You found a neighbor. Now the question is what to do about it. Now, eventually, NASA, when it designs rockets, doesn't care about those philosophers during the days of Galileo. And these philosophers were the most powerful, politically speaking, at the time. They were so powerful that they put Galileo in house arrest. But NASA doesn't care about them now, because the reality that we live in is based on what Galileo thought. So it really matters what the reality is that we live in, who is on our street, who are our neighbors, and whether people agree to that or not is completely secondary. Whether it's an idea that is liked on Twitter, whether it leaks into social media or doesn't leak into social media, whether there is a committee that decides behind closed doors when to release the information, I don't care about it. This is child play. All of this is completely secondary. It's makeup. Let's figure out what is going on our street. Okay, and that is the important item. What do we do about it?
Actually, can I just hop in for a second? So Avi was talking about what we should do about it. And then Paul previously mentioned something about METI. And I just wanted to mention that, Avi, you can correct me if you're wrong, if I'm wrong, sorry. But previously you have mentioned that you don't think that if we do find ET, you don't think that we should contact the aliens because you think we should familiarize ourselves with what we're dealing with first.
Some people have suggested that.
Yeah, but I know, Paul, you're on the advisory board of METI, correct, with Jose as well?
Yes.
Yeah, so if you guys don't mind, I just wanted to ask Jim about his opinion on this, because I haven't been able to find anything about what you think about actually contacting aliens and what you think we should do in this case.
So I can tell you that NASA hasn't delineated a specific position on whether we should or should not communicate with aliens in a specified way. So it's the signal that Carl Sagan and Frank Drake created and beamed using Arecibo, wasn't under the auspices of NASA. Arecibo is funded by the National Science Foundation. So NASA hasn't decided this is how we should communicate with aliens, whether they're listening or not, and then effectively gone out and done that. That's not been our approach. And so I think that's that really answers what you'd asked.
Actually, yeah, picking up on that and also on what Avi mentioned, given that, well, as Salma has correctly said, we have 2 members of the advisory committee of METI. For those watching that might not be aware of the term, messaging extraterrestrial intelligence, so actively trying to make contact. I understand that perhaps a while ago, the conversation radio signals, which is what we perhaps had at the time. But I think now and in the coming years or decades, we'll get into the position of perhaps even being able to send probes to some other places aside from the solar system and have the technological ability of doing so. So what do you think, all of you, Paul, you can start if you want, on this sense? Should we actively try to just visit other places, like obviously not only sending radio signals, so just surveying the sky, but actually by sending non-tripulated or even humans in there, and those probes that can just visit other stars on Proxima Centauri, perhaps.
Yeah, so let me comment on that. So if you take the chemical rockets that we launched so far, that NASA launched so far, they move at 1% of the speed of light. So it would take us 50,000 years to reach the nearest star. Okay, if we want to reach it in the next 20 years, we need to move at 1/5 of the speed of light. Okay, and that is an important thing to keep in mind, because the New Horizons mission, for example, will be leaving the solar system. And by the way, I'm very embarrassed about that. Let me mention why, because it carries a box with 30 grams of the ashes of Clyde Tombaugh, the scientist who discovered Pluto because it was meant to explore Pluto. Now, why am I embarrassed? Because ashes carry no information. You take the DNA of a person and you burn it up. You destroy all the genetic information. So in order, imagine an extraterrestrial finding this box, they would say, what is this primitive ritual of humans to destroy the information about a person they want to commemorate? That makes no sense. In my view, we should send quickly another spaceship that moves faster than New Horizons and basically apologizes for what we sent out in that box and says, don't pay attention to that. We are much more sophisticated now. And actually, I asked I asked Alan Stern about it, the PI of New Horizons, and I asked him, why didn't you send a stem cell? That carries the information. So then the extraterrestrial will be able to reconstruct the Clyde Tombaugh. And he said that it would have been a bureaucratic nightmare to put anything at NASA. So just to come back to your point, if the politicians were to decide that finding more about our environment is as important as finding more about our adversaries, other nations, that's what the defense budget is all about, just finding out what other people are doing. If we were to think, let's find out what other neighbors in our cosmic neighborhood are doing,
and take that with we would have technological capability to do so. Like, we have actually made some significant advances in that. So let's imagine that we can actually perhaps faster, definitely, than we do now. So just
well, it's but let me just finish the sentence, and I can comment on what you just said. So if we were to allocate $1 trillion a year to science to explore our cosmic neighborhood, the same amount of money that we allocate right now to defending ourselves against other people, we could do a lot of progress. Okay, we can have those. Now, what is the technology we will use to bring things close to the speed of light? Well, that's the logic behind the Starshot project that I'm the head of the advisory board for that. It's a project supported by $100 million that was announced in April 2016 to use a light sail that is propelled by a very powerful laser beam that brings it, if it weighs roughly a gram, brings it close, to a fifth of the speed of light, so that it takes only 20 years to reach Proxima Centauri. Okay, so this is one technology that can do that.
Okay, and on the question that whichever you really, so let's say we now, if this project or something similar is successful and we have the technological ability to do so, should we or should we not try to reach other worlds and other beings, and which would be the potential risks in doing so? I mean, I guess that it's not the first time that someone poses the question of, okay, we are just entering the atmosphere of a planet where we presume there are some beings in there. How are we going to react to them, or how should we interact when first establishing contact to them, or can we predict how they will react to us?
Well, think about human history. Let's make the analogy.
That's actually,
some ships that left Europe, and by the way, they were motivated by commercial interests to bring goods from other places and to bring it back. And that's why the Queen or, someone else funded those explorations. And suddenly they discovered the Americas, something they haven't expected. And so if you look back, these trips, first of all, were motivated for the wrong reason, but they made discoveries. They improved our knowledge of what continents exist on Earth. So in much the same way, we may be motivated by one reason, but once we go out there, we will find a completely different reality than we imagined. And the second thing is these trips caused a lot of damage to the existing cultures in those continents. They brought diseases. If you think about it, they were not so good to the inhabitants of these continents. And therefore, there is an ethical issue here. And I know that NASA has rules about carrying life from Earth. These are the bureaucratic hurdles that I was mentioning before about carrying a stem cell. And it's for that reason. NASA wants to know what is out there without contaminating it.
Yeah, and indeed, those are guidelines that are internationally constructed and discussed in at COSPAR at their panel of planetary protection. And so those guidelines then are something that we have signed up to, and they involve both forward contamination, but also backward contamination. So indeed, we work very hard to be able to sterilize our rovers when we land them on Mars. When the samples are being created by Perseverance and those rocks are going to be coming back, they will come back to the United States and be put in a biosafety level 4 facility, and then really examined initially quite intensely to determine any pathogens before they are released to other scientists outside the facility for further study. So yes, NASA is very serious about that, and we have processes and procedures in place to work that.
I don't know, Paul or Jose, if you have any views on this. Well, Paul, since you raised the METI question earlier before.
Yes, if I could just jump in, there are a number of things tangled together here. One is, for example, if we go to Mars, you know, and there is life on Mars and it's not Earth life, we're going to mess it up by exploring it or colonizing it. We have to think very carefully about the ethics of that. One could be even more dramatic, and I have to confess that I'm co-author of a paper which looks at what we might call active panspermia, that is in deliberately sending microbial life to other planets with a view to seeding them with Earth life on the basis that if they're barren but are capable of supporting life, that it is a good thing if terrestrial life is sort of spread around a bit. And that's obviously an ethical minefield, but I'm certainly prepared to consider that. Where I part company with some distinguished people, for example, Stephen Hawking, is in thinking that there's some sort of risk in us sending out, for example, radio messages. I see no risk at all. We're sending them out anyway. We can't get them back. And I think deliberately sending a message to some cluster of stars or something like that is actually a great way to get young people interested in science. And I've been involved in one or two of those METI-type projects. I think it's completely without any risk. If ET wants to come here to take our planet, it's been here 4.5 billion years. Avi keeps making this point. There were stars and planets around long before Earth even existed. If they're advanced civilizations, they know about our planet and they could have taken it at any time. Presumably, they haven't done that, and there's no particular reason they should be interested in us as a species to come here and wipe us out. So I see no danger whatsoever in sending out messages of that sort. As far as the technology of us reaching the stars in the foreseeable future, I think it's still an enormous long shot to go from the Starshot project, which is already very speculative, to the notion of humans ever venturing beyond the solar system. I think that's a very long shot. In any case, I think we would send AIs. I don't think we'd send flesh and blood beings.
I think from a NASA perspective, this is a healthy discussion in the sense that what we just talked about earlier, indeed, where NASA is developing capabilities to be able to look at atmospheres of exoplanets and where we might find what we feel, scientifically are habitable environments, will focus opportunities for the METI community to actually send signals to those. So they're intimately connected because of the approach that we are all taking in the search for life beyond Earth.
Could I just jump in and make a point to pick up on things that Avi has been saying? I think he's absolutely right that something in our solar system is far more exciting and more important, and it gets around this problem that you have to wait for vast amounts of time to have a conversation. And if we're going to send signals, I think we should be sending those signals to where we feel there might be possibly a dormant alien probe, lurking somewhere in the solar system. That we should try first, because if we were to wake up a dormant probe, we'd be having a conversation with an extraterrestrial entity in almost real time.
I may say
of course.
a comment. Once I was asked to write a reply to this comment by Stephen Hawking, and he said that it would be better not to reveal our position in the universe or in the galaxy. I would say that we have already revealed our position, because we have sent probes, Voyager, we have sent messages, so there is not much to do about it. But I would say this. Well, first, I have said before that we are sinners, but we are also good people, I would say. I'm confident, basically, in humanity, and maybe in the aliens. I'm realistic too. We are symbolic and communicative species, and our desire is to explore and to communicate. I am a fan of Star Trek, and when I was a kid, there was the beginning of the TV show saying to go boldly where no man has gone before. So I think this is our desire. And in writing that paper, I mentioned it's a very short paper. The only way to answer these questions is with speculations, science fiction. And I used two movies that inspire me. Avatar is one of them, and the other one that I like very much is District 9. I wrote that paper in the mid, so I was biased maybe by the context. I was living in Berkeley, in California for a semester. It was 2016, in the middle of the electoral campaign in the US. So maybe I was biased, but that. Let's imagine for a moment that we are not facing aliens that come to destroy us or to enslave us, but we are facing or receiving refugees, escaping from a Holocaust in their home planet. And I ended the paper saying, what are we going to do? Are we going to build walls, or are we going to welcome them? And so that's would be my position on that.
But Jose, just a comment. It's not our radio signals that should be most significant for them. It's the fact that you want to save them from their sins.
No. We live in a real world, and I want to learn from them. And so, as I enjoy meeting people that are not Catholic, that are not religious, so on. I wouldn't have any problem, but I guess is that we're going to receive some kind of message that we are going to need to decode somehow, or we are going to be with artificial intelligence. So that's my guess, but I might be completely wrong.
Yeah, actually I have that has brought up perhaps final question. I don't know, Paul, you want to answer it. Would there be any difference between either they finding us or us finding them, potential civilization or actual kind of beings? Would it be a difference? Would it matter if they were either, let's say, something close to biological or chemical, or they were artificial, say like actually no chemistry involved in the thing, as it is in ourselves? Would it matter?
Your question is very timely, because when I finish this discussion, I'm going to join a conference that is going to discuss artificial intelligence, the ethical and religious implications of artificial intelligence, and my brief is to talk about Seti, and if we discover extraterrestrial intelligence, is almost, in my view, overwhelmingly likely to be non-biological or post-biological, or I don't like these terms, I would say designed intelligence rather than naturally evolved intelligence. And it's going to be, of course, by our standards, have incomparably greater intellectual power. And the question is how we should deal with that. I think there's no doubt at all, if we ever do make contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, we're going to be in that situation. I don't think we'll be dealing with the proverbial little green men or flesh and blood beings. I think it's going to be something wholly alien to us. And that's, for me, is the biggest conceptual leap. It's not that we're not alone. It's that we'd be dealing with a totally different type and with a different scale of intelligence.
Yeah, I would like to
a scale that is godlike proportions.
I would like to support what Paul says. And in fact, I say that to my class at Harvard on the first day. I tell them, half of you in the class are below the median. Now, for Harvard students, that's difficult to accept because they all think that they're at the top 2%. But that cannot be possible. The definition of the median in statistics is that half of the students in any class are below the median. That's by definition. Yes. You cannot avoid that, even if you are a student at Harvard University. And if we think about ourselves as being in a class of intelligent civilizations, I would vote that we are in the middle of the bell-shaped curve, okay? And that we will learn a lot from a smarter kid on our block.
As we should.
I go for that point. Do you want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have to wrap things up. But before we do, I wanted to ask one last question, just as a take-home kind of message for our viewers. So if each of you in one sentence could describe the future of the search for extraterrestrial life and what you think will happen in the future in one sentence, what would you say? If we can start with Avi, please.
I would say that maybe in the next few years, we will find an object of extraterrestrial technological origin. And the reason I say that is Robert Frost's poem on taking the road not taken. The Galileo project is taking the road not taken. There is a chance we will find a fruit, low-hanging fruit, that was never picked up simply because nobody took that road.
Very interesting. And Jose, would you like to go?
Yes, I'm more or less in the same tone that Avi concluded. I want to quote, I usually when I give this kind of lecture, I conclude with this quote from T.S. Eliot, the journey, not the destination matters. I think here is what we learn about the universe, about maybe aliens, and most important, about ourselves.
Absolutely. And Paul, what do you think?
Well, I'm always a great believer in the unexpected that comes about through advances in science and technology. And there are whole areas which are emerging, for example, quantum computing and synthetic biology. And the next 10 or 20 years could see a total transformation of the way we think about the world because of these new possibilities. So we may go about looking for life and intelligent life beyond Earth by using a completely different strategy because of insights gained from this new technology.
Yeah, very interesting. And finally, Jim, what do you think?
Well, I think we're living in an absolutely amazing age where enormous discoveries are going on and various approaches are now being pursued that will lead us one way or another to answering the question, are we alone? And I think we can answer that within the next 10 years.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, I think I would like to wrap things up with, as you, I'm sure I'm aware, Frank Drake said that in the end, I guess that Seti is just a search for ourselves, who we are and where we fit. So hopefully 10, 20, who knows, we'll start to figure out the answer to that question. But in the meantime, I think this discussion, as you know, could have has been going on for a few decades already, and I'm sure it will continue like that. And I guess that the people watching, the people who have been watching us tonight, are the ones that will continue with that mission together with the foundations that has been laid out by you and the people that preceded you. So hopefully we will be soon finding an answer to this so exciting question. Even if this is sadly the end to this extremely exciting discussion, and I'm really grateful that the four of you came here today to just talk to us and talk among yourselves. I think it's been really passionate. It has come to an end, but just for everyone else before you leave, this is not the end of our activities, and it's really nice that Avi, you have mentioned the Starship project, because next week on next Thursday, 6 p.m. as well, we'll advertise all the details on our social media and website. We are going to be interviewing, Michael Garrett, Professor Michael Garrett, the director of the 12 Bank Center for Astrophysics, is going to be interviewing the CEO of the Breakthrough Initiative, and Andrew Simeon, the director of the Seti project at Berkeley. So feel free to tune in for that one if you want to. And also, and aside from that, as you know, we have a website where we will be posting this discussion live, and hopefully we'll be there forever. Who knows? Perhaps it will set up some precedent for whatever comes in the future, and we will be able to gather together in 20, 30 years, or hopefully 10, and see we were right or we were wrong. So in that website, you can find lots of resources for astrobiologists and aspiring astrobiologists, as some of you might be, careers, education, outreach, whatever you want to. You know that you can volunteer, from pretty much volunteering with us to writing for our blog, and just really exploring where you can study astrobiology, the courses you can take. That's a really good place where to start. So, well, I hope you have enjoyed Universal Dialogues 2 as much as we have, and honestly, we can wait to see you at our events, and who knows if next year at a third edition. Yeah, honestly, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.